It feels really nice again. There's a great feel. This Adidas Play With You shirt really feels good. Hi guys, welcome back to Phil's Corner and welcome to episode 15 of Phil's Corner. If you don't know, and if you're new to the channel, my name is Phil and I basically make a living talking about football shirts, so I thought I'd put that all together into a YouTube channel for you guys and just spend a bit of time talking about shirts and the stories behind some of the great football shirts of history and talking about the current day football shirt landscape and culture. So that's what this channel is all about. If you are new and you're interested in football or football shirts, hit that subscribe button, join the community on here. I think just today we've crossed 1700 subscribers, which is a huge encouragement to me. So thank you to all who have already subscribed. And if you're new, hit that subscribe button, join, as I say, the community and just get involved in the discussion on here. And hopefully you'll find a warm home here at Phil's Corner. One of my favourite things about being a football shirt influencer is that I get sent some really great shirts. And just this week I received the new Football Manager shirt, and shout out to the guys at Football Manager, to the team at Football Manager. This shirt, as you can see here, is actually made by Hummel as well, which is fantastic. I love Hummel, probably my favourite brand in football shirts. And just to show you guys this shirt, a lovely purple base with some lime green cuff detailing there. The great new logo. We've got a big sponsor, which is one of the charities that Football Manager work with. And it's even personalised with my name on the back. And 21 there for Football Manager 21, which is coming out very, very soon. So thanks to Football Manager. And you can actually be in with a chance to win one of these shirts every week with some competitions that are running if you're part of FMFC, which is an exclusive membership platform. Thanks to Football Manager for sending one of those shirts. Speaking of thanks, I'm just getting started because I also want to say thank you to two new patrons who have joined my Patreon in the past couple of weeks. Andy Cowan and Clayton Stone. Thank you, Andy and Clayton, for supporting me on Patreon, alongside the other guys who have already supported me. And if you don't know about my Patreon, it's basically a place where I'm sharing a lot of my insights to do with how I got to where I am today, in terms of my design and social media experience and those sorts of things. I basically package that together in what I'm calling More Than a Shirt Academy. So I've got exclusive content on there. There's also a Slack group where we talk daily about stuff, about shirts, about deals we're finding. And everyone who subscribes to my Patreon will get first dibs on when I sell shirts in my collection. And I'm due to do that this week. And if you support me on Patreon, you'll get the first opportunity to buy those shirts before anyone else on Twitter, where I usually do my sales. Again, there'll be a link in the description. And there's also a video, which I'll put the link now for, which talks a bit about what you get on my Patreon. So thank you. As I say, to those guys who have just supported me and those who are already doing so, do check that out if that sounds interesting. And once again, thank you to the sponsors for today's video. Firstly, Foot Fanatics. Now, I've talked a lot about Foot Fanatics and I will keep talking about them because not only are they supporting me once again and they're generously supporting me, but I also want to say, guys, if you're into shirts from South America, Foot Fanatics are a fantastic place to go. Not only do they ship really fast to the UK, but their prices are great. And even though you have to pay an import tax on some of your orders, it scales up depending on how much you order. And also, I find that by the time you factor in the exchange rate, which is quite competitive, and the prices on there as well. And of course, like any other retailer, Black Friday is coming and Foot Fanatics will be participating. There's already a discount code there, which you can use for 12% off, I believe. So slightly more than the usual 10% that you can get with Phil's 10, my discount code. But yeah, Foot Fanatics, I'll be sharing some more deals as well on my Twitter. So do follow me on Twitter to keep up to date on my favourite finds. And do check out Foot Fanatics. They're a great retailer, really good at offering. And Brazil is such a great place to go for shirts. And a huge thank you as well to Mystery Football Jerseys. And loads of places are, of course, doing mystery boxes at the moment. But Mystery Football Jerseys are one of my favourite places to get a mystery box if you enjoy them. Their prices are fantastic. Their product range is really strong. This isn't just one of those mystery box services that buys cheap shirts or just sells off their cheap stock. This is a really high quality service. And they're actually doing a Christmas pre-order now, so if you order now you can get a box in time for Christmas, which makes a great Christmas present for somebody who's into shirts, or maybe even just for yourself. If you want to treat yourself to a mystery box. Well, mystery football jerseys come highly recommended for myself, and thank you to them. They've been a supporter for many videos, as have Foot Fanatics. So both of them, they help make these videos possible, and they both deserve your attention, so go check them out. And thanks to them for sponsoring today's episode. Today's video is a really popular topic. I'm talking about player issue shirts and whether they're actually worth it. And as you can see next to me, I've got two shirts which are virtually identical. We've got one replica and one player issue shirt. I say virtually identical, there are actually quite a few differences, but we'll get into that in the video today. Before I do that though, I'm going to answer some comments and talk about some of the comments you guys left on the last episode. We'll start with Theo Mullins, who asks, what minor things annoy you about a kit? For me, it is when there is a box for the name and number, example Croatia 2016. Maybe if I could just give two, because I don't want to spend too long on this subject. One of them would be one button collars. I don't particularly like those collars where you've just got one button. I tend to find they look a bit half-hearted. You know, I quite like maybe a couple of buttons, but just have one. It tends to be quite flappy. The neckline can look a little bit cluttered in my eyes as opposed to a proper collar or no collar at all. And the other one, which many people I think would share, is when you have a plain back on a striped shirt. And we've seen this a lot in recent years. It's basically come about because there are regulations around things like number visibility, coming from particularly FIFA and UEFA, but even domestic leagues as well. That's a really good question there. Maybe a subject for a future video. I really enjoyed reading your comments last episode about Holy Grail shirts and what your Holy Grail shirts were. So thank you to those who shared your Holy Grails. I've got a few comments here which I'm going to go through now about that. Firstly from C23C, who says, my Holy Grail is definitely a New York Metro Stars Adidas shirt which they never actually got to use because they were bought out by Red Bull. And he also mentions a USA Third shirt worn just a few times. And I think this is actually really interesting because shirts which aren't worn a lot, and I talked about this briefly on the last episode, can actually gain something of a cult status, or certainly a kind of interest. And it's quite interesting because sometimes you'd think a shirt needs to be worn a few times or even a couple of seasons to really gain status, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. And obviously this era that we're living in, shirts rarely do go above one season anyway, and sometimes even third shirts or even away shirts are only worn 1 or 2 games. But even in just 1 or 2 games, a shirt can gain enough notoriety and a design can certainly stand out enough for it to be considered quite interesting. And sometimes those shirts, like the one you've mentioned here, C23, if they've never been worn, or maybe they were axed, or maybe there was a prototype which is amazing, those kind of stories can be really interesting and really intriguing. So yeah, I think when it comes to Holy Grail shirts, sometimes it's those ones that have barely been worn that could be the most interesting. Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, C23. Rich Johnson, who is one of the guys who was talking about kits long before I was, one of the originals, one of the members of the Football Attic, you may know him and certainly his work. He mentions about his Holy Grail shirt, the Argentina 86 home shirt. Says he once saw it on eBay for 2.5k and the seller then relisted it by the time he'd verified them, sadly, for 5k. Now, Rich, you're certainly talking about a category way beyond what I usually deal with. But that's the thing, when you're getting into this high end of collecting, the margins certainly are quite significant. You know, you can see a shirt, as you've mentioned there, for 2.5k, and the fact that it's doubled for no other reason than no one put a bid on it initially is quite painful to see. It certainly puts a lot of my collecting into perspective. But I also wanted to mention Rich because he's actually got a book called The A to Z of Weird and Wonderful Football Shirts, and it's a great book. I'd highly recommend it if you're looking for a book about football shirts. Rich is a great guy. It's a great book and another great Christmas present actually for yourself or for a friend. So yeah, great book from Rich, and I'd highly recommend that. Next up, Pal sent a story here which really resonated with me, and he was talking about one of his Holy Grail shirts, which is a 2005 CSK Moscow UEFA Cup shirt. And interestingly, he was saying that his team, Spartak Moscow, got knocked out in the competition, but he ended up supporting CSK because they were a fellow Russian team. And they, of course, went on to win the competition. And I really like this story because it talks a lot to me as well. And even though I'm a Liverpool fan, I'm not one of those supporters who doesn't collect other UK shirts. I've even got an Everton shirt in my collection because I was actually at Goodison Park once for a promotion with Umbro. But yeah, I love actually looking at the broader picture when it comes to shirts. And outside of rivalries, I think it's really important to consider that sometimes a shirt is really good and it just happens to be a rival shirt. But that's just my opinion, and a lot of people are really strict when it comes to not collecting other UK clubs, for example, or rival team shirts. And I can understand that. Some people can't even stand the sight of the colour of their rivals. I'm the opposite. But yeah, great story, pals. Really nice to hear that. Finally, we've got a question from one of my patrons, from Steve-O, who asks, player names and numbers on the back, do they add value or are you playing a risky game? And this is a great question, Steve-O, because there's different opinions on the subject of player names and numbers. A lot of people avoid them, and they use examples like you might get a player name and number, and then that player transfers in the January transfer window, or maybe a player changes their number or even changes their name. That's happened before in the past. I think personally I quite enjoy player name and numbers, particularly because I like typefaces and I like seeing different typefaces year on year. I really like club specific typefaces as well as league wide fonts and those kind of things. And when I look back on shirt history, I quite enjoy seeing those typefaces. To me, they help tell the story of shirts, and I quite like looking back on those typefaces. Things like when the Premier League numbers have changed over the years. I think that's really interesting. But at the same time, I really understand that people don't like them. And I think when it comes to value, whilst generally speaking, a shirt with a player name or number, if it's in good condition, is worth more than one without. That sort of comes with the caveat that if the player leaves, goes to a rival club or that sort of thing, that can, in effect, taint the shirt for a lot of people. But what I would say is when it comes to football shirt collecting, generally speaking, a player name and number is going to be more valuable. And personally, I would actually say it's a good thing. But thanks, Steve, for your question, and all you guys who commented and asked questions on the last episode. But now it's time to talk more about replica and player issue shirts. And just before I do a bit of a comparison between these two Japan shirts next to me, let's just kind of set the scene and talk about, certainly from my perception, what's been happening in recent months. And I would say that there's been a real growing interest in the subject of player issue shirts. A couple of years ago, when I started working full-time in football, I didn't see many people talking about replica and player issue shirts or the debate around player issue shirts. Certainly people were mentioning it and you would see questions about it, but it wasn't nearly as much of a topic as it is today in 2020. But in 2020, there's definitely been more people I've noticed talking about player issue shirts. Quite a few members of the community have been exclusively buying player issue shirts or certainly focusing more on that as a topic. And I've just seen so many more people ask questions. Simple questions like, is it actually worth it? Is it worth buying a player issue shirt? Are they worth that 30, 40, sometimes even £50 price difference? And from a collecting perspective, do they retain that kind of difference in value over time? Just from a design perspective, are they worth it? Those kind of questions. So there's a lot to say about them, and I wanted to really be quite honest with you guys and show you the differences in this Japan shirt and talk about my experiences, because I think it's actually quite a complex question. I don't think it's a simple yes or no. It's one of those classic it depends answers, but I wanted to talk about that today in this episode. And let's start with a bit of a spot the difference. Let me get these Japan shirts off the wall and talk to you about the differences. Now I've got the replica and player issue versions of the latest Japan shirt, a great design, one of my favourites of last year. And as I'm talking to help show what I'm talking about, I will be showing pictures on screen. But for reference, the purple hanger here is for the replica and the black hanger is the player issue. And with this Japan shirt, there are quite a few differences. Firstly, just as a general point, if you look at the colours here, now it's hard to see perhaps and the lighting isn't great in this room, but I would say that the colours are actually slightly brighter on the player issue shirt. Now this is something again which is hard to see on camera, but in a straight like for like comparison, certainly I would say the blues are slightly crisper, slightly more vibrant on the player issue. It's a minor difference, but that is one thing I noticed certainly with the player issue shirt. And also there's quite a big difference in the material of the shirt. If we start with the replica, we've got Adidas's relatively recent Aero Ready material, and that is actually written on the bottom of the shirt as well for reference. As a material, this is much more of a classic kind of football shirt material. When I say classic, I mean anything in the past kind of 10 years. This is the standard of Adidas replica shirts, so you will see this on most Adidas replica shirts. If you now move to the player issue shirt from a material perspective, this is quite different, and visually there's almost this kind of waffle texture. And I really like the look of this, and not just the look but the feel of it. It is slightly lighter, it feels a bit more breathable, and I really like the aesthetics of it. I really like that texture. You can even see a different texture in the collars there. And what I really like about this, as I say, is the feel of it. It feels nice. It feels a little bit more high quality. You know, if you were to look at this from a distance, if I now switch it over with the player issue on this side and the replica on this side, you can't immediately tell from a distance, but up close you can tell the difference in material. And this is actually called heat ready, and again you can see that by the patch on the bottom, which tells you that it is a heat ready shirt. You can actually also tell on the inside neck. And yeah, in a straight life-like comparison, most people aren't necessarily going to be too bothered about the difference, but I do prefer the player issue material. I think it looks a bit better and it feels a bit nicer to wear as well. But that's not to say that the replica doesn't look good as well. Let's talk about the details now, the applications. I think this is another big difference. If we start with the replica, you can see here you've got an embroidered Adidas logo, the Japan flag detailing as well, and the Japan crest, which is quite a large kind of patch. The quality of that is really good, and a lot of people really like embroidered crests and applications. Personally though, I quite like plastic applications, and the player issue shirt certainly fulfills that role for me. If we start with the Adidas logo, this is one of my favourite features of recent Adidas player issue shirts. You've got a really nice raised plastic application with this wonderful texture, and I will show you a close-up so you can really appreciate what I'm talking about. It feels really nice again. There's a great feel. This Adidas player issue shirt, this Japan shirt, really feels good. But I really like that raised texture. It's a really interesting look, but I really like that. And if we go over to the Japan crest as well, that's a really nice texture once again of what I believe is a heat pressed crest. It's certainly that kind of nice plastic material, as is the Japan flag. So this is quite a funny thing, but often a lot of people prefer embroidered details, but a lot of manufacturers now are using plastic applications, not just for player issue but even for their replica shirts. I think in general I really like the feel and the look of plastic applications, and that would be my personal preference. So certainly the player issue shirt for me is slightly nicer. Now let's talk a bit more about the design features of a kit and how that can change, and we'll start with the 3 stripes on this Japan shirt. Now on the player issue shirt here, you can see the 3 stripes are on the side, but they actually kind of float, if you like, on that panel. And if I show you the replica now, you can see that the 3 stripes, which are actually stitched onto the shirt and raised from the shirt a lot more, run from the top and bottom of that side panel. Now, in many ways, again, this isn't really kind of a better or worse situation, but there's something about the player issue look which I prefer personally. I think it's probably because the replica look there that we're seeing on this Japan shirt is the kind of thing we've seen on most Adidas shirts in the past 10 years or so. Whereas the player issue shirt just feels a bit more interesting and fresh to me. But that's someone like me who's been looking at shirts religiously for the past few years, so most people won't even notice the difference. But there is a difference, and that's one thing to say actually, and I think a lot of people are concerned about this, or at least factor this in when collecting player issue shirts over a replica shirt. And that is the simple fact that sometimes the replica shirts simply look different to the ones the players wore. And if you are a bit more of a purist, that can be quite an important factor. There are other differences too. If we take this player issue shirt here, you can see on the inside neck, we've got a lovely little detail there. I don't know what that says there in Japanese, but it looks great on the patch. But on the replica shirt, you'll actually notice that on the front of the kit, and it's far down there on the bottom. There you go, there we see it there. So again, differences in the placement of details, things like that. I wouldn't say one's necessarily better than the other, but it is something to consider, and if you're comparing shirts you may notice those differences. And another difference to note here on the player issue shirt is that on the bottom hem it's kind of bordered in this lovely thick red extra border here, whereas on the replica shirt we don't have that. There's no extra red section on the bottom. And when you compare the overall shirts, if I was to lay them down, and I'll show you a picture of that now, you can see that extra red actually on the player issue shirt helps the shirt to pop a lot more, so I quite like that detail, which you don't have on the replica. But really guys, apart from those differences, essentially this is still the same shirt. This is still a Japan shirt, and the replica shirt still looks really good. if you're looking at the pattern, and I'll switch it around now with the player issue on this side, you can see the pattern still looks good on the replica. It's not like you're losing out on the essence of the shirt. And in many ways, it's only when you zoom in, it's only when you look more closely at things like the applications that you really start to appreciate the differences. And actually, from a fit perspective, from a size perspective, they're quite similar. A lot of player issue shirts sometimes can actually be a size tighter, and you need to go a size up if you're going to be wearing the shirts. But in this example, in this Adidas example, the difference isn't too bad. So there you go, guys. Hopefully that's been interesting. And certainly, I would say either of these shirts are really good. Incidentally, guys, if you want to buy this Japan shirt or any other recent new shirt, you can buy them at Kitbag. And I've recently started up as an affiliate of Kitbag. So I'll share a link in the description to them if you want to buy either of these Japan shirts. So all those differences aside, is it actually worth it? Is it worth buying the player issue shirt over the replica? Is it really worth that price difference, which is often quite significant? Often a shirt which retails for £60–70 as a replica can be over £100 as a player issue shirt, so it's quite a big difference. Here's a few points to consider from my perspective. Firstly, I would only buy a player issue shirt if you really like the shirt. And it's quite an obvious thing to say, but given the price difference, I wouldn't just buy a player issue shirt just because it's closer to the actual shirt that the players wear if you're not fully sold on the design. So something like this Japan shirt, I love this design. It's one of my favourite designs of last year, as I said. And all the player issue shirts in my collection are shirts which I really like. So to give another recent example, I bought the Corinthians Senna shirt, and that was from Brazil, and I was able to get the player issue version for a really good price. And I love that design. It's one of my favourite designs, as I say. And I'm really happy to own the player issue version because there's a few extra little details and touches which you do get on the player issue shirt that you don't on the replica. And I was happy to pay a bit more because I love the shirt so much. Or another example, I really liked PSG's third shirt from 2016, and that had some gorgeous applications. It was the iridescent swoosh and the iridescent PSG crest. Again, one of my favourite modern shirts. And when I saw someone who was selling that, I had to get that as it was a player issue version of one of my favourites of recent years. So don't just buy a player issue shirt if you're kind of half-hearted or you just kind of like it, but you don't love it. I would say stick to shirts that you really like if you're going to spend that extra price difference, because when it comes actually to owning that shirt and you've had it for 6 months, you don't want to look back and think, I don't really like this, and I've paid extra to get hold of something which I don't really love. Secondly, it's important to say that player issue shirts are often different, and those differences can actually really make a shirt. So to give an example, Nike's recent shirts have this really fantastic vapor knit ventilation texture and a really nice look to their shirts, which you only have if you buy the player issue shirts. And Nike have been doing this, and other manufacturers have been doing this before, but I would say that this year's vapor knit shirts look particularly good, and I'm going to be buying one of them certainly. I haven't decided which one to get yet, but I really like that vapor knit texture. I think it looks fantastic, and I think that almost makes the shirt, it almost makes this year's Nike shirts a bit more interesting. And from a collecting perspective, I quite enjoy those differences that we're seeing in technology over the years. So the few player issue shirts that I do own do cover some of those key touch points. For example, I've got one of Marseille's kits from 2010, I think it was, and that was when you had Adidas trying out Tech Fit and Full Motion player issue shirts. These two different shirt material, shirt construction options, and really interestingly, at the time, players were often given the choice between Tech Fit or Full Motion shirts. So it's a fascinating time in shirt history and shirt construction, and I really like the Marseille third shirt. It's got a great story behind the design. So yeah, sometimes the differences and the features in those player issue shirts do make them much more interesting and collectible. But as I say all these things, of course, many people, they don't care about shirt construction and shirt materials and things like that. They just want the right colours and the right pattern and that sort of thing. And if you're someone who's like that, then you probably aren't going to be as interested by many player issue shirts. And I don't think one's a better route than the other. I think both are perfectly viable decisions to buy a football shirt. But do look out for those differences. And if you're someone who really is interested in the details, interested in the fabrics of the shirt and the pattern and the ventilation of the shirt and all those things, then player issue shirts are certainly worth investigating further. One really key thing to say about this discussion is that player issue shirts are often still available in sales, and if you're looking at things like Black Friday coming up and Christmas and next year's sales and the end of season sales, you will find player issue shirts. So actually, if you're interested in player issue shirts and maybe you're not kind of looking at one particular shirt, but you're just interested in getting one or two from various teams, look out particularly for the end of season sales. You can get really big discounts. You can get player issue shirts for way under half the price of a replica shirt, let alone the initial price of the player issue shirt. So they're really worth picking up in things like sales. But as I say all these things, it's worth saying that player issue shirts are typically snapped up quickly for the most popular shirts. So take last year for example, popular shirts like Roman's third shirt or Inter's away shirt were snapped up within days of the initial release, and they were very hard to find afterwards. And in those examples, the player issue shirts get snapped up even quicker sometimes than the replica shirts, or certainly there's fewer player issue shirts available than replica shirts, so they do sell out quickly. So for really popular shirts and limited edition shirts or things like that, you have to act really quickly. But if you are someone who's a bit more interested in just generally owning a player issue shirt, then look out for this sales. I would say you don't really want to be buying player issue shirts on release unless you absolutely love the design and you think it's going to sell out quite quickly. Otherwise you can be patient and do find them in sales. Do look out for the Black Friday deals that will be coming up. There will be big discounts on sites, and it'll be a good time to buy player issue shirts if you're interested in them. So just to summarise really our discussion today, your attitude or approach to player issue shirts will really vary depending on the kind of collector you are. And I talked more about this in my video talking about how to start a football shirt collection. Do check that out. But yeah, if you're the kind of collector who just buys shirts because they're cheap, because they're good deals, you're not going to have many player issue shirts, and that's perfectly fine. You'll still have a great collection. If you're someone who really wants to look at specific shirts from specific teams, again, it will depend. You don't necessarily need to get player issue shirts, but they can be quite nice. But for someone like me who's very selective, I only really buy shirts or keep shirts in my collection that I really like, that I think stand out from a design perspective, that maybe almost comment on elements of football shirt history and that sort of thing. So I really enjoy player issue shirts, but probably only about 10% of my collection is a player issue shirt. Most of them are replica simply because they're cheaper. And you know, if I had an unlimited budget, I would probably always buy player issue shirts, but I don't. So yeah, it's not a simple yes or no answer. Do your research, guys. Do ask other collectors their experiences of player issue shirts. And I would say don't just kind of go from one or the other without doing your research and looking at the differences, looking at what you're actually getting for that extra bit of money. Don't fall into that trap of thinking you need to own a player issue shirt. If you buy a replica shirt, it's still valuable. It's still a great addition to any collection. Don't think because you're spending a bit less you're not getting the real thing. And as we talked about with these Japan shirts, if you've got the replica shirt, it still looks great. Despite the differences, it's still that fantastic design. So I hope today's video has been useful. I hope there's been one or two things which have maybe just been food for thought. And I'd love to hear what you think of today's episode. I'd love to hear what you think of these Japan shirts. Which do you think you would buy? Do you think the player issue shirt is actually worth it compared to the replica? What do you think of those differences? Have I even missed any differences between the two? I probably have, actually, thinking about it. But there you go, guys. That's today's episode, episode 15. As I said at the start, do subscribe if you're new to the channel. Every subscriber goes a long way to growing Phil's Corner. And if you're interested in chatting more, learning more about football shirts, then do check out my Patreon as well, More Than a Shirt. There's loads of stuff on there, loads of exclusive content. All the details are in the description below. And of course, thank you once again to my sponsors today, Foot Fanatics and Mystery Football Jerseys. Go and check them out as well. Thanks so much, guys. I'll see you soon for episode 16.